In the shadow of the Persian Empire's golden age, under the iron rule of Xerxes I, a name now whispered in dread echoes through the annals of history: Hydarnes, a general whose ambition carved a bloody path through loyalty and betrayal. The year was 480 BCE, and the world trembled beneath the weight of Xerxes' ambition. His empire, vast and unyielding, stretched from the Indus Valley to the shores of the Mediterranean. Yet it was not enough. The great king sought to crush the defiant Greeks, those stubborn city-states that dared to resist his divine will. The invasion of Greece was no mere campaign. It was a spectacle of power, a tidal wave of men in steel meant to drown the West. In submission, at its heart stood Hydarnes, a man of noble blood, commander of the Immortals, the elite guard of Persia's might. But his story, one of valor turned to treachery, begins not in glory, but in the crucible of war. Hydarnes was no ordinary man. Born into the aristocracy of Susa, his lineage traced back to the old Median tribes, fierce warriors who had once rivaled the Persians before bending the knee. His father, a satrap of renown, had gifted him a life of privilege, but Hydarnes was forged in the fires of discipline. By his 30th year, he was a towering figure, broad-shouldered, with eyes that burned like the desert sun. His voice could silence a council, and his sword had tasted blood in campaigns across Asia Minor. To the men under his command, he was a god among mortals, revered and feared. The Immortals, 10,000 strong, followed him without question, their bronze armor gleaming under the Persian sky. They were the Empire's spear, unbreakable, unrelenting, and Hydarnes wielded them with precision. The march to Greece was a spectacle of terror and awe. Over 2 million men, if the chroniclers are to be believed, moved like a living sea across the Hellespont. Ships lashed together formed a bridge, a marvel of engineering that mocked the gods of the sea. Chariots rumbled, elephants trumpeted, and the dust of their passage blotted out the sun. Hydarnes rode at the forefront, his crimson cloak billowing, a symbol of Xerxes' trust. The great king himself, seated on a golden throne, watched his army cross into Europe, his gaze fixed on the horizon where Athens and Sparta awaited. Hydarnes, ever vigilant, ensured the Immortals were ready for the trials ahead. Their role was clear: to strike fear into the Greeks, to break their lines, and to pave the way for Persia's dominion. Yet, beneath the surface of loyalty, a shadow stirred in Hydarnes' heart. The campaign was not unfolding as planned. The Greeks, though vastly outnumbered, fought with a ferocity that defied reason. At Thermopylae, a narrow pass became a slaughterhouse. 300 Spartans, led by King Leonidas, held the line against wave after wave of Persian might. Hydarnes led the Immortals into the fray, expecting a swift victory. Instead, he found death. Spartan spears pierced his men, their bronze shields unyielding. For 2 days, the pass held, and Hydarnes' frustration grew. Whispers among the ranks spoke of Greek resolve, of men who fought not for gold or glory, but for something intangible: freedom. To Hydarnes, such ideals were folly, yet they gnawed at him. The breakthrough came not through force, but through treachery. A local Greek, Ephialtes, revealed a mountain path that flanked the pass. Hydarnes seized the opportunity, leading his Immortals under cover of night. The maneuver was flawless. At dawn, the Spartans were surrounded, and Leonidas fell, his body hacked apart. The pass was taken, but the cost was heavy. Hydarnes stood over the carnage, his boots slick with blood, and felt no triumph. The Greeks had died, but their defiance lingered, a specter that haunted the Persian advance. Xerxes praised Hydarnes for his cunning, but the general's mind was elsewhere. The Greeks' resolve, their willingness to die for their cause, planted a seed of doubt in a heart long hardened by war. As the army pressed deeper into Greece, Hydarnes' unease grew. The campaign, meant to be a swift conquest, bogged down. Supplies dwindled, and the Greeks struck from the shadows, their guerrilla tactics bleeding the Persian host. Hydarnes, tasked with securing the supply lines, found himself stretched thin. His immortals, once invincible, now faced ambushes in rocky defiles and poisoned wells in abandoned villages. The men whispered of curses, of gods turning against them. Hydarnes dismissed such talk, but the weight of command pressed harder. He began to question Xerxes' vision. Was this war worth the blood it demanded? The great king's ambition seemed boundless, but his promises of glory rang hollow against the backdrop of mounting losses. In the councils of war, Hydarnes' voice grew sharp. He urged caution, arguing for consolidation over reckless advance. Other generals, sycophants eager to curry favor, mocked his restraint. Xerxes, seated on his throne, listened but said little. His eyes, cold and unyielding, seemed to pierce Hydarnes' soul. The general felt the weight of that gaze, a reminder of the price of failure. Yet it was not fear that stirred in Hydarnes, but something darker: ambition. The empire was vast, but its master was mortal. Hydarnes began to see himself not as a servant, but as a rival. Why should he bleed for a king whose hubris threatened to drown them all? The turning point came in a forgotten village near Plataea. A Greek prisoner, captured during a raid, spoke of dissent among the city-states. Sparta and Athens, though united against Persia, harbored rivalries that could be exploited. The prisoner, a man of sharp wit and sharper tongue, offered Hydarnes a dangerous proposition, a way to end the war without further bloodshed. The general listened, his mind racing. The prisoner's words were poison, but they were seductive. To act on them would mean betraying Xerxes, defying the empire, and risking everything. Yet the prospect of power, of reshaping the war's outcome, was intoxicating. Hydarnes sent the prisoner away, but the seed of treachery had taken root. That night, alone in his tent, Hydarnes stared at a map of Greece, its jagged coastlines a mockery of his ordered world. The immortals slept, their loyalty to him absolute. But loyalty to Xerxes, that was another matter. The general traced his finger along the map, lingering on Athens. A plan formed, one that would shake the foundations of the empire. It was a gamble, one that could elevate him to legend or cast him into oblivion. Hydarnes made his choice, and with it sealed his fate. The path to betrayal was set, and the blood that would follow would stain history forever. The Persian camp sprawled across the plains like a city of iron and canvas, its fires casting flickering shadows on the faces of men hardened by war. Hydarnes, cloaked in silence, moved among them, his presence commanding respect. The immortals, his chosen, stood guard over the camp's heart, where Xerxes' golden pavilion gleamed under the stars. The great king's ambition had brought them here, to the edge of the known world, but it was Hydarnes who bore the burden of turning that ambition into reality. The campaign against Greece, now months old, was a grinding ordeal. The victory at Thermopylae had opened the path to Athens, but the cost lingered in the general's mind. The Spartans' defiance, their willingness to die rather than yield, had left a mark deeper than any wound. Hydarnes' plan, born in the quiet of his tent, was a spark in a world of tinder. The Greek prisoner's words echoed, division among. The city-states could be a weapon sharper than any sword. Hydarnes knew the risks. To act against Xerxes was to court death, not just for himself, but for his family, his name, his legacy. Yet, the empire's cracks were widening. The army, vast as it was, strained under its own weight. Supply lines stretched thin across hostile lands, and the Greeks, though scattered, struck with precision. Hydarnes saw an opportunity not just to end the war, but to reshape it, to carve his own destiny from the chaos that he began with subtlety. In the war councils, he spoke of strategy, urging Xerxes to exploit Greek rivalries. The great king nodded, his mind consumed by visions of burning Athens, but Hydarnes' true intent lay elsewhere. Under the guise of reconnaissance, he sent trusted lieutenants to meet with Greek emissaries in secret. These were not men of honor, but opportunists, men who saw profit in betrayal. Through them, Hydarnes learned of Athens' growing distrust, of Sparta, of Thebes' wavering loyalty. The general's mind worked like a loom, weaving threads of dissent into a tapestry of treachery. He was careful, his movements cloaked in loyalty, his words measured. But every step drew him closer to the abyss. The first contact came in a moonless night, far from the Persian lines. A Greek defector, a merchant from Corinth, met Hydarnes in a grove sacred to some forgotten god. The man's eyes darted, his hands trembling as he spoke of a coalition fraying at the edges. Athens, he claimed, could be bought not with gold, but with promises of autonomy under Persian rule. Hydarnes listened, his face a mask of stone. The merchant's words were a gamble, but they aligned with the prisoner's earlier claims. The general offered no promises, only a nod. The merchant left with a pouch of silver and a warning. Speak of this to anyone, and death would find him. Hydarnes returned to camp, his heart pounding with the weight of what he had set in motion. Days turned to weeks, and the campaign ground on. The Persians sacked Athens, its Acropolis reduced to ash. Xerxes reveled in the destruction, believing it a sign of victory. Hydarnes, however, saw the truth. The Greeks were not broken. They retreated to their ships, their resolve unbroken. The naval battle at Salamis loomed, a clash that could decide the war. Hydarnes knew the Persian fleet, though vast, was unwieldy, its commanders plagued by hubris. He began to feed information to the Greeks, not directly, but through intermediaries. A whispered rumor here, a misplaced map there. Each act was a step further from loyalty, a step closer to ruin. The immortals, unaware of their commander's duplicity, remained his shield. They fought with unmatched ferocity, cutting down Greek raiders in the hills. But Hydarnes' heart was no longer in the slaughter. He saw the faces of the fallen, Persian and Greek alike, and wondered if the empire's glory was worth the cost. His lieutenants, loyal to a fault, began to notice his distance. One, a grizzled veteran named Artabanus, confronted him. "Your eyes are elsewhere, my lord," he said, his voice low. Hydarnes dismissed him with a laugh, but the words stung. Trust, once ironclad, was eroding. He could not afford suspicion, not yet. The turning point came at Salamis. The Persian fleet, lured into the narrow straits, was decimated. Greek triremes, swift and deadly, turned the sea red. Hydarnes watched from the shore, his face impassive as Xerxes raged. The great king's dream of conquest was unraveling, and Hydarnes' secret dealings had played their part. He had passed word of the fleet's movements, disguised as careless scouting reports. The Greeks, forewarned, had struck with precision. Yet, victory for Hydarnes was bittersweet. The cost of betrayal was isolation. He stood among his men, a traitor cloaked in honor, his soul torn between ambition and guilt. As winter approached, the Persian army faltered. Xerxes, shaken by defeat, prepared to withdraw, leaving a smaller force under Mardonius to continue the fight. Hydarnes was ordered to remain, to lead the Immortals in a campaign of attrition. The general accepted, his face a mask of obedience. But in his heart, he knew the war was lost. The Greeks, united by their victories, would not yield. And Hydarnes, now a puppet of his own machinations, had no choice but to play his part. He met again with the Corinthian merchant, demanding more. The man spoke of a final gambit, a chance to turn Thebes against its allies. Hydarnes agreed, knowing it was his last throw of the dice. The camp grew quieter as the army prepared to split. Hydarnes walked among the Immortals, his presence a reminder of their strength. But his mind was elsewhere, plotting the next move in a game where the stakes were his life. The Greeks were closing in, their spies as cunning as his own. Xerxes' trust, once absolute, was fraying. Hydarnes knew the truth could not stay hidden forever. Each step he took was on a knife's edge, and the blood that would follow would be his own as much as his enemies'. The general who had once dreamed of glory now walked a path of shadows, his fate sealed by the choices he could not undo. The Persian army, now a shadow of its former might, trudged through the harsh Greek winter of 479 BCE. The plains of Plataea, scarred by war, bore witness to a campaign unraveling under the weight of ambition. Xerxes had retreated to Sardis, leaving Mardonius to salvage the invasion, but it was Hydarnes, commander of the Immortals, who carried the true burden. His betrayal, a serpent coiled in the heart of the empire, had begun to tighten its grip. The defeat at Salamis had shaken the Persian resolve, and Hydarnes' secret dealings with the Greeks had ensured that loss. Yet the general's mask of loyalty remained, his every move calculated to hide the treachery that now defined him. The Immortals, still fierce, followed Hydarnes with unwavering devotion. Their bronze armor, dented but polished, gleamed under the pale sun. They were the empire's fist, but their numbers had dwindled. Ambushes, disease, and the relentless Greek resistance had taken their toll. Hydarnes walked among them, his crimson cloak a stark contrast to the gray landscape. His men saw a leader, a warrior without peer, but beneath his stoic exterior, a storm raged. The Corinthian merchant's promises of a fractured Greek alliance, of Thebes' potential defection, had ignited a fire in Hydarnes' ambition. He no longer fought for Xerxes. He fought for a vision of his own making. The camp at Plataea was a fortress of tension. Mardonius, a general of equal rank but lesser cunning, commanded the broader army, his arrogance a mirror of Xerxes' own. Hydarnes, tasked with securing the northern approaches, used his position to deepen his schemes. He met again with the Corinthian, this time in a crumbling temple on the edge of the camp. The man's words were bold. Thebes, resentful of Athenian dominance, could be swayed to betray the Greek coalition. In exchange, they sought guarantees of power under Persian rule. Hydarnes listened, his mind a battlefield of doubt and desire. To deliver Thebes would cripple the Greeks, but it would also bind him irrevocably to his treason. The negotiations were a dance of shadows. Hydarnes sent emissaries, men he trusted with his life, to Theban contacts under cover of night. They carried no written orders, only words whispered in the dark. The Thebans were cautious, their leaders torn between pride and pragmatism. Hydarnes offered them wealth, autonomy, and a place in the Persian order. But trust was a fragile thing. The Greeks, united by necessity, sniffed out treachery with the instincts of hunted wolves. Hydarnes knew the risks. One misstep, and his head would adorn a spike outside Xerxes' pavilion. Yet, the lure of power was stronger than fear. The general's days were a balancing act. By day, he led the immortals in skirmishes, crushing Greek raiders with ruthless precision. His men marveled at his ferocity, unaware of the duplicity that drove him. By night, he plotted, his tent a sanctuary of secrets. Maps littered his desk, marked with routes and rendezvous points. The Corinthians' network grew, feeding Hydarnes scraps of intelligence. Spartan movements, Athenian supply lines, Theban hesitations. Each piece was a step toward his goal, but also a step closer to discovery. The immortals, loyal to a fault, began to sense a change. Whispers spread of Hydarnes' late-night visitors, of his guarded conversations. Artabanus, the veteran lieutenant, confronted him again. "You carry a weight, my lord," he said, his eyes searching. Hydarnes deflected with a jest, but the old warrior's suspicion lingered. To quell it, Hydarnes led a daring raid on a Greek outpost, slaughtering its defenders and burning their supplies. The victory silenced doubters, but it was a hollow triumph. The blood on his hands felt heavier, each life a reminder of the path he had chosen. The immortals cheered, but Hydarnes saw only the faces of the dead, Greek and Persian, blurring into one. The Theban plot advanced, but cracks appeared. A courier, intercepted by Mardonius' scouts, carried a message meant for Hydarnes. It spoke of a meeting, vague but damning. Mardonius, already wary of Hydarnes' independence, summoned him. The confrontation was tense, held in the shadow of a firelit tent. Mardonius' questions were sharp, his tone accusing. Hydarnes, calm as stone, explained the message as a ruse to lure Greek spies. Mardonius relented, but his trust was fraying. Hydarnes left the tent, his heart pounding. The noose was tightening, and he knew it. He doubled his efforts, pressing the Corinthian for results. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A Theban noble, swayed by promises of power, agreed to sabotage the Greek alliance. He would delay reinforcements, sowing chaos at a critical moment. Hydarnes, emboldened, fed the noble false intelligence about Persian movements, ensuring the Greeks would be caught off guard. The plan was audacious, a gamble that could end the war in Persia's favor or in Hydarnes' own. But the general's ambition blinded him to the growing danger. The Greeks, ever vigilant, had their own spies. A captured Persian deserter spoke of strange meetings, of Hydarnes' name whispered in the dark dot as the armies gathered for the decisive battle at Plataea. Hydarnes stood at a crossroads. His immortals, unaware of his duplicity, prepared for war. The general's mind, however, was elsewhere. The Theban betrayal was his last card, but it was a fragile one. If it succeeded, he could claim victory, perhaps even supplant Mardonius. If it failed, his life was forfeit. The weight of his choices pressed down, a burden no armor could shield. Hydarnes looked to the horizon, where the Greek army massed, their banners defiant. He had set the stage for triumph or ruin, and the gods alone knew which would claim him. The plains of Plataea buzzed with the clamor of war. Tents stretched to the horizon, their canvas stained by dust and blood. The Persian army, though diminished, was a beast of iron and will, its ranks bolstered by levies from across the empire. Hydarnes, standing atop a rise, surveyed the field. His immortals, fewer now but no less deadly, stood ready, their spears a forest of gleaming bronze. The Greeks, encamped across the plain, were a smaller force, but their victories at Salamis and Thermopylae had forged them into something unbreakable. Hydarnes knew this battle would decide not just the war, but his own fate. His betrayal had reached its zenith. The Theban noble, swayed by Hydarnes' promises, had acted. False reports of Persian strength had reached the Greek commanders, sowing doubt. The noble delayed Spartan reinforcements, claiming treacherous terrain. Hydarnes, through his network of intermediaries, ensured the deception held. The Corinthian merchant, now a fixture in his schemes, relayed messages with practiced ease. But the web of lies was fragile. Greek scouts prowled the hills, their eyes sharp. Hydarnes' emissaries moved with care, but each meeting was a roll of the dice. The general slept little, his dreams haunted by visions of betrayal his own. And those he had orchestrated. Mardonius, oblivious to the depth of Hydarnes' treachery, pressed for an attack. The Persian commander saw Plataea as his chance to restore Xerxes' glory. Hydarnes, in the war councils, played the loyal general, urging caution while secretly undermining the plan. He leaked details of Mardonius' strategy to the Thebans, knowing they would reach Athenian ears. The Greeks, forewarned, shifted their lines, preparing for a Persian assault that would never come as Mardonius intended. Hydarnes' duplicity was a blade, cutting both ways. Each move strengthened his position, but also drew the noose tighter around his neck. The immortals, Hydarnes' pride, remained his shield. He led them in drills, their discipline a stark contrast to the chaos of his mind. The men trusted him, their loyalty forged in blood, but whispers persisted. Hydarnes, ever watchful, questioned Hydarnes' orders, his tone respectful but probing. The general deflected, but the veteran's gaze lingered. To maintain control, Hydarnes led a brutal raid on a Greek supply line, burning wagons and slaughtering guards. The victory rallied his men, but it was a distraction. The true battle was within Hydarnes, where ambition warred with loyalty, and fear gnawed at both. The Theban noble's betrayal bore fruit. On the eve of battle, the Greek lines faltered, their cohesion strained by delayed reinforcements. Hydarnes watched from a distance, his heart a mix of triumph and dread. The plan was working, but at a cost. A Greek spy, captured near the Persian camp, spoke of Theban treachery before his throat was cut. The news reached Mardonius, who summoned Hydarnes once more. The confrontation was a storm of suspicion. Mardonius, his patience gone, accused Hydarnes of negligence. The general, calm as ever, spun a tale of Greek deception, but Mardonius' eyes burned with doubt. Hydarnes left the tent, his fate hanging by a thread. The Battle of Plataea began at dawn. The Greeks, despite their disarray, fought. With a ferocity that stung the Persians, Hydarnes led the immortals into the fray, their charge a thunderclap. Spears clashed, shields splintered, and the earth drank deeply of blood. Hydarnes fought like a man possessed, his sword a blur. But his mind was elsewhere, tracking the Theban betrayal, watching for signs of collapse in the Greek lines. The noble had promised chaos, but the Spartans, late but unbroken, arrived at the critical moment. The Greek line held, and Hydarnes' gamble began to unravel. As the day wore on, the Persian army buckled. Mardonius, leading from the front, fell under a Spartan spear. The loss broke the Persian spirit. Hydarnes, seeing the tide turn, rallied his immortals for a final stand. They fought with savage precision, cutting a path through the Greek advance. But the general's heart was heavy. The Theban betrayal had failed, exposed by a traitor within their own ranks. The Greeks, united once more, pressed their advantage. Hydarnes, bloodied and weary, realized his plan had collapsed. His ambition had outpaced his caution, and the price was coming due. The retreat was chaos. The Persian army, once a juggernaut, scattered across the plains. Hydarnes led his immortals in a fighting withdrawal, their discipline holding where others broke. But the Greeks pursued, relentless. In the confusion, a message reached Hydarnes. The Corinthian merchant had been captured, his tongue loosened by torture. The man had named Hydarnes, revealing fragments of the general's treachery. The news was a blade to the heart. Hydarnes knew the truth would reach Xerxes if it had not already. His time was running out. As night fell, Hydarnes stood among his men, their faces grim. The immortals, loyal to the end, asked no questions. But Artabanus' gaze was heavy, his silence louder than words. Hydarnes looked to the stars, the same stars that had watched his rise and now bore witness to his fall. The battle was lost, the war slipping away. His betrayal, once a path to power, was now a chain around his neck. The general knew what awaited: Xerxes' wrath, a traitor's death. Yet, even in defeat, Hydarnes' ambition burned. He would not go quietly. The final act was yet to come. The dust of Plataea had settled, but the air was thick with defeat. The Persian army, once a tide of conquest, was now a broken remnant. Scattered across the Greek plains in the summer of 479 BCE, Hydarnes, commander of the immortals, stood among the ruins of the Persian camp, his crimson cloak tattered, his face etched with the weight of failure. The battle had been a slaughter. Mardonius' death had shattered the army's spine, and the Greeks, led by Spartan steel and Athenian cunning, had carved through the Persian ranks. Hydarnes' betrayal, meant to turn the tide, had collapsed under the weight of its own ambition. The Theban noble's duplicity had been exposed, and the Greek alliance, though battered, had held firm. The immortals, now a shadow of their former glory, rallied around Hydarnes. Their loyalty was a blade, sharp and unyielding, but it cut both ways. The general knew the truth was closing in. The Corinthian merchant, tortured into confession, had named Hydarnes as the architect of the Theban plot. Word had reached the Persian commanders, and whispers of treachery spread like wildfire. Hydarnes, ever the strategist, prepared for the inevitable. He sent his most trusted men to destroy evidence, burning letters and silencing witnesses. But the empire's eyes were everywhere, and Xerxes, though far in Sardis, was not blind. Hydarnes led his immortals in a desperate retreat, cutting through Greek skirmishers to secure a path to the Hellespont. The journey was a gauntlet of ambushes. Greek warriors, emboldened by victory, struck from the hills, their arrows finding gaps in Persian armor. Hydarnes fought with a ferocity that belied his turmoil, his sword dripping with blood. His men, unaware of his betrayal, saw only their commander, a lion among wolves. But Artabanus, the veteran lieutenant, watched with eyes that saw too much. During a night march, he confronted Hydarnes, his voice low but firm. "The men speak of secrets, my lord. They say your name carries a curse." Hydarnes met his gaze, his silence a confession. Artabanus said no more, but the rift was clear. The retreat reached the coast, where Persian ships waited to carry the survivors back to Asia. Hydarnes, standing on the rocky shore, felt the weight of his choices. The immortals, fewer than 1,000 now, boarded the vessels, their faces grim. Hydarnes knew he could not return to Xerxes as a hero. The great king's spies had reached him, their reports damning. A summons arrived, sealed with the royal sigil, ordering Hydarnes to Sardis. It was not a request, but a command, laced with menace. The general burned the letter, but its words seared his mind. He had gambled everything, his honor, his men, his life, and lost. The journey to Sardis was a march through a world closing in. The roads, once triumphant paths of conquest, were now a gauntlet of judgment. Hydarnes rode at the head of his immortals, his mind racing. He considered flight, seeking refuge among the Greeks or in some distant satrapy. But the empire's reach was long, and his name was marked. The Corinthian merchant, now dead, had revealed enough to condemn him. Other intermediaries, fearing for their lives, had fled or turned against him. Hydarnes' network of spies and traitors, once his strength, was now a noose. He rode in silence, the clatter of hooves a drumbeat to his fate. In Sardis, the city of gold and power, Xerxes awaited. The great king's court was a labyrinth of intrigue, its walls whispering of betrayal. Hydarnes entered the palace, his immortals left behind. The throne room was vast, its columns towering like sentinels. Xerxes sat atop his golden throne, his eyes cold as the desert night. The court was silent, the air heavy with accusation. Hydarnes knelt, his heart steady but his mind a storm. The charges were read: conspiracy with the enemy, sabotage of the campaign, betrayal of the empire. Each word was a hammer, striking at the life he had built. Hydarnes did not deny them. To lie now was to insult the gods. Xerxes' voice was a blade, cutting through the silence. "You, who were my sword, have turned it against me. Why?" Hydarnes rose, meeting the great king's gaze. He spoke of the war's futility, of the blood spilled for a dream that could not be. He spoke of ambition, of a vision where Persia could thrive without breaking itself on Greece's shores. His words were bold, a final act of defiance. The court gasped, but Xerxes' face was stone. The great king raised a hand, and the guards moved. Hydarnes did not resist. He had known this moment would come, had seen it in every choice he made. The immortals, quartered outside the city, were kept ignorant of their commander's fate. Hydarnes was taken to a cell beneath the palace, its walls damp with the sweat of the condemned. There, in the dark, he reflected on his path. He had sought power, not for greed, but to reshape an empire he believed was faltering. Yet his betrayal had brought only ruin. The Greeks had won, the Persian army was broken, and his name would be a curse. The general, once a legend, was now a traitor. His legacy, written in blood and failure, died as dawn broke. Hydarnes was led to a courtyard, its stones stained with the past. The executioner's blade gleamed, a crescent of judgment. Hydarnes stood tall, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He thought of the immortals, of the men who had followed him to death. He thought of Thermopylae, of Plataea, of the choices that had led him here. The blade fell, and Hydarnes, the general who had betrayed Xerxes, paid with his life. His blood soaked the stones, a final offering to an empire he had both served and undone. The fall of Hydarnes sent ripples through the Persian Empire, a wound that bled in whispers and shadows. His execution, though swift, was not the end of his story. In the weeks that followed, Sardis buzzed with tales of the general who had dared to defy Xerxes. The immortals, stripped of their commander, were a blade without a hand to wield it. Artabanus, now their leader, spoke little of Hydarnes, but his silence was heavy. The men who had fought under the crimson cloak mourned not just their general, but the trust they had placed in him. The empire, though vast, felt the sting of betrayal, a crack in its unyielding facade. Xerxes, seated on his throne, was a king, diminished. The Greek campaign, meant to crown his reign, had crumbled. Plataea's defeat, coupled with Hydarnes' treachery, cast a shadow over his rule. The great king ordered the records of Hydarnes' name struck from the annals, his deeds erased as if he had never been. But history is not so easily silenced. In the markets of Susa, in the camps of the empire's far reaches, men spoke of the general who had gambled everything. Some called him a traitor, others a visionary, but all agreed his end was a warning. No man, not even a legend, could defy the great king and live. The immortals were disbanded, their remnants scattered to other units. The elite guard, once the Balean, pride of Persia, became a memory, their bronze armor stored in dusty vaults. Artabanus, loyal to the end, led a new command but carried the weight of Hydarnes' fall. He had seen the truth in his commander's eyes, had sensed the ambition that burned too bright. In quiet moments, he wondered if Hydarnes had been right, if the empire's path was doomed, its conquests a pyre for its own destruction. But such thoughts were dangerous, and Artabanus buried them deep in Greece. The victors told a different story. Hydarnes' betrayal, though it had failed, weakened the Persian resolve. The Theban noble, exposed and executed by his own people, became a cautionary tale of greed. The Greeks, hardened by war, rebuilt their cities. Athens rose from its ashes, its Acropolis a symbol of defiance. Sparta, ever austere, honored its dead with stone and song. The coalition, once fractured, grew stronger, bound by the blood of Plataea. Hydarnes' name was a footnote in their tales, a shadow that had briefly darkened their path before fading into oblivion. Yet, in the quiet corners of the world, Hydarnes' story lived on. Scribes in distant lands, unswayed by Xerxes' decrees, recorded his tale. They wrote of a man who saw the empire's flaws, who dared to dream of a different path. His betrayal was not born of cowardice, but of a belief that Persia could be more than a machine of conquest. These accounts, hidden in clay tablets and whispered in taverns, painted Hydarnes not as a villain, but as a tragic figure, a man caught between loyalty and ambition. Crushed by the weight of both. The empire marched on, its borders vast, its armies unbroken. But the Greek war left scars that would not heal. Xerxes, haunted by defeat, grew paranoid, his court a nest of suspicion. Generals who had once stood tall now walked with care, their loyalty questioned. The Hellespont Bridge, a marvel of ambition, was dismantled, its timbers left to rot. The dream of conquering Greece faded, replaced by the grim task of holding an empire together. Hydarnes' betrayal, though erased from official records, lingered as a wound that would not close. In the years that followed, the world changed. Greece, emboldened, became a beacon of defiance, its city-states forging a legacy that would echo through time. Persia, though still mighty, turned inward, its ambitions tempered by the lessons of Plataea. Hydarnes' name, cursed by some, revered by others, became a story told in shadows. His immortals, once a legend, were forgotten, their spears silent. The general who had betrayed Xerxes had paid with his life, but his choices, his gambles, his dreams, left a mark that time could not erase. Centuries later, on the plains of Plataea, shepherds would speak of a ghost in a crimson cloak, wandering the fields where blood had soaked the earth. They said he was a warrior, a man who had defied a king and paid the ultimate price. The wind carried his name, a whisper of ambition and ruin. Hydarnes, the general who had dreamed too greatly, became a legend not of glory but of tragedy, his story a reminder that even the mightiest can fall when they reach beyond their grasp. The stones of Sardis, stained with his blood, stood silent, but the world remembered.